40 years keeping a secret. An empire built on lies and a woman determined to reveal it all. But when they tried to silence her, the unexpected happened. A white horse, a miraculous escape, and a truth that could no longer be buried. Welcome to the channel. Before starting, like and subscribe so we can continue creating stories like this one. The sky over Boston was heavy on that autumn morning. Dark clouds announced a storm that perfectly reflected the mood of Edward Blackwell, a 68-year-old man who observed the horizon from the window of his office on the 30th floor of the most imposing building in the financial center of the Massachusetts capital. "Mr. Blackwell, your coffee." The secretary placed the cup on the solid mahogany desk, interrupting his thoughts. "Thank you, Nancy," he replied without taking his eyes off the window. "Any news from Harrison?" "He called saying he'll arrive in 30 minutes for the meeting." Edward sighed deeply. Richard Harrison, his partner for almost 3 decades, was growing increasingly impatient. The financial empire they had built together, Blackwell and Harrison Investments, was under threat, and they both knew the reason. A reason that had a first and last name, Eleanor Rivers. On the other side of the city, in the Beacon Hill area, Eleanor adjusted the shawl over her shoulders before setting out for her morning walk. At 78 years old, the former accountant maintained a rigorous routine, despite the wheelchair that had become her inseparable companion after a stroke 5 years ago. Her apartment, decorated with antique furniture and black and white photographs, held much more than just memories. "Ms. Rivers, are you sure you don't want me to accompany you today?" asked Martha, her caregiver for more than a decade. "Yes, dear, I'm sure I need this moment alone. It's important." Eleanor smiled while discreetly checking the small device installed under her wheelchair. The tracker was working perfectly, as was the tiny camera. She was certain they had been observing her movements for weeks. Eleanor knew her time was running out. 40 years of keeping a secret that could destroy Edward Blackwell's empire was too long. The evidence she had accumulated over all those years was secure in a digital safe, with clear instructions to be disclosed if anything happened to her. The disappearance of Thomas Mitchell, chief accountant of the former Blackwell Investments, had never been clarified. Only she knew what had really happened on that night in 1984 and how Edward was involved in the case. As her electric wheelchair glided along the sidewalk toward the Longfellow Bridge, Eleanor mentally reviewed her plan. The safe in her home contained documents, recordings, and enough evidence to expose decades of financial fraud, fund manipulation, and the involvement of powerful figures in Boston society. At the Blackwell and Harrison headquarters, the meeting between the partners was growing increasingly tense. "We need to resolve this today, Edward." "She knows too much and is about to talk." Richard slammed his fist on the table, making the picture frame topple over. "The political connections we've built, the investments, everything could collapse if she opens her mouth." Edward rose slowly, adjusting his impeccable Italian linen suit. "Calm down, Richard. Eleanor Rivers is just an old woman in a wheelchair. I have everything under control." "You've been saying that for months. Meanwhile, our contacts inform us that she's been sending coded emails to a journalist from the Boston Chronicle. How can that be under control?" A dangerous gleam appeared in Edward's eyes. "Because it ends today." He picked up his cell phone and dialed a number. "Are you in position? Good. Don't fail." At 10:43 that morning, the city of Boston witnessed a scene that would headline all newspapers. Security cameras on the Longfellow Bridge captured the exact moment when a man in a dark suit approached from behind an elderly woman in a wheelchair and, without hesitation, pushed her over the safety railing toward the turbulent waters of the Charles River. Panic took hold of passers-by. Screams echoed across the bridge as everyone watched in horror at the fall. Then something inexplicable happened. A white horse, grazing near the riverbank under the care of its handler, suddenly broke into a gallop, breaking through the fence that contained it and plunging into the waters of the Charles River. Michael Anderson, a horse trainer from the East Cambridge Equestrian Club, could hardly believe what he was seeing. Jasmine, the 15-year-old mare he was training for a dressage competition, had never demonstrated such behavior. As if guided by a supernatural instinct, the mare swam directly to where Eleanor had fallen, allowing the elderly woman to grab onto her mane. It's a miracle, a true miracle. People shouted as they filmed with their cell phones the incredible scene of the white mare swimming back to shore with the elderly woman clinging to her neck. In his office, Edward watched the live broadcast, incredulous. The man he had hired for the job had fled the scene as soon as he noticed the cameras and witnesses. The operation that should have been discreet had turned into a televised spectacle. "How is this possible?" he whispered to himself, watching the white mare emerge from the waters with Eleanor still conscious, firmly clinging to her mane. A chill ran down his spine when he recognized the animal. Jasmine wasn't just any mare. She had belonged to him many years ago before being sold to a stable after temporary financial problems. How could she be right there at that moment? The phone rang insistently. "Edward, are you seeing this? It's on broadcast TV. The entire plan is ruined." Richard's voice was trembling. "We need a new plan, now." At the hospital where Eleanor was taken, the press gathered waiting for news. Against all expectations, the elderly woman had suffered only minor scratches and hypothermia and was conscious and stable. Even more surprising, she refused to file a complaint against her attacker. "I didn't see the face of whoever pushed me," she declared serenely to the detective taking her statement. "And honestly, I'm more interested in thanking the animal that saved me." What no one suspected was that, beneath that apparent tranquility, Eleanor was smiling internally. The plan was going exactly as she had foreseen. The images captured by the camera installed on her wheelchair were being transmitted to a secure server, and the GPS had recorded the entire route. More importantly, she knew exactly who had pushed her. She had waited decades for this moment, and now the game was finally beginning to turn in her favor. Meanwhile, on social media, the video of the rescue by the white horse went viral. Hashtags like Now White Horse and Charles River Miracle dominated the trending topics. The mare Jasmine instantly transformed into a symbol of hope and heroism. What no one imagined was the true story behind that animal and its connection to Eleanor Rivers and Edward Blackwell. 3 days after the bridge incident, the city of Boston was still echoing with what had happened. The Boston Chronicle headlined, "Miracle on the Charles, Heroic Mare Saves Elderly Woman." At the newspaper office, Jonathan Walker, a 35-year-old investigative journalist, thoughtfully observed the photograph of the elderly woman being rescued. Something in that story didn't fit. "Boss, I need time to investigate the Longfellow Bridge case," he said, as he entered the office of William Davidson, editor-in-chief. "Jonathan, we already have 3 reporters covering this story. What else do you want to discover?" The old woman survived, the attacker fled, and a horse became a national hero. Case closed. The editor barely raised his eyes from his screen. "Not for me." Jonathan placed a folder on the desk. Eleanor Rivers isn't just any elderly woman. She was the chief accountant at Blackwell Investments in the 80s, before abruptly resigning. And the man who supposedly pushed her. The cameras didn't show his face, but by his posture and the suit, I'd bet my salary it's someone connected to Edward Blackwell. "You're accusing one of the most powerful men in Massachusetts of trying to." William carefully chose his words. "Silence a former employee? Based on what?" Jonathan slid an envelope across the desk. "Over the last 6 months, I've received coded emails from this lady. I finally managed to decipher part of them. She mentions a scheme from '84 and says she has evidence against E. Base related to the disappearance of the accountant. Edward Blackwell and Eleanor Rivers have a history that needs to be revealed." The editor sighed deeply. 3 days. That's all I can give you." Meanwhile, in the luxurious gated community where he lived, Edward remained locked in his private study. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the Charles River, but he kept the blinds closed. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, lawyers, politicians, and allied businessmen demanding explanations about the rumors that were beginning to circulate. "Mr. Blackwell," his assistant spoke through the intercom, "Mr. Harrison insists on speaking with you personally." Minutes later, Richard Harrison stormed into the room like a hurricane. "The company's stocks have fallen 12% since yesterday. Investors are panicking about rumors that the attempt against the old woman is linked to our company." "Lower your voice, Richard." Walls have ears. Edward poured 2 fingers of whiskey into crystal glasses. There's no evidence that links me to the incident. Not yet. But what if that old lady decides to talk? What if she really did keep documents, all these years like she threatened? Edward stared at the horizon through a gap in the blinds. We need to find out what she has, and more importantly, who she's been talking to. At the hospital, Eleanor was receiving a visit from her only living relative, her niece Laura, a 42-year-old university professor. "Aunt, I can't believe you're refusing to file a police report. Someone tried to." Laura took a deep breath, holding back tears. "Dear, calm down. Everything is happening exactly as I planned." Eleanor spoke in a low voice, checking if they were really alone in the room. "For 40 years I've kept evidence against Edward Blackwell. Evidence of how he defrauded investors, manipulated the financial market, and used privileged information to enrich himself at the expense of hundreds of people." "But Aunt, no, listen to me." The firmness in the elderly woman's voice surprised her niece. In 1984, Thomas Mitchell, chief accountant at Blackwell Investments, discovered a scheme to divert funds. He trusted me, showed me incriminating documents. We arranged to meet to take everything to the authorities, but he never showed up. Laura listened attentively as her aunt continued. "Days later, the company announced that Mitchell had resigned and left the country, but I knew it was a lie. That same week, I saw Edward and his then assistant, Richard Harrison, burning documents on the company grounds. When they noticed my presence, Edward offered me a promotion and a raise. I accepted, but not out of ambition. I needed access to gather evidence." "Why did you never tell the police?" "Because Edward had the police, judges, and politicians in his pocket. He still does. For years, I copied documents, recorded conversations, created a complete file on their illicit activities. When I was ready to report it, I suffered a stroke and became dependent on this wheelchair. I thought my chance had passed." Eleanor took her niece's hand. "Until 6 months ago, I realized I was being followed. Edward somehow discovered that I still had the evidence. That's when I started to prepare. I installed cameras, trackers, sent coded emails to a journalist." "And the horse? How do you explain that?" An enigmatic smile appeared on the elderly woman's face. "Jasmine isn't just any horse. She belonged to Edward in the 90s, a birthday present for his daughter. When he faced temporary financial problems, he sold the animal. I secretly bought her and donated her to the equestrian club, with the condition that they never reveal who the true owner was. I've cared for her from a distance all these years." "But how did she know you were in the water?" "We don't know. How to explain the connections between humans and animals, do we?" Eleanor smiled. "Now I need you to do something for me. In my apartment, behind the painting in the living room, there's a safe. The password is your son's birth date. Take everything you find there and bring it to journalist Jonathan Walker from the Boston Chronicle." Outside the hospital, inside a dark car with tinted windows, a man was carefully watching the entrance. On his phone, he dialed a familiar number. "Mr. Blackwell, the niece is with her now. We'll know where she goes when she leaves. Don't lose sight of her, and remember, absolute discretion this time." At the Boston Chronicle office, Jonathan was searching through digitized newspaper archives from the 80s. He found a small note about Thomas Mitchell's sudden departure from Blackwell Investments and his supposed move abroad. In the attached corporate photo, he recognized Eleanor Rivers in the background, a young woman with a serious expression. "What happened to you, Thomas Mitchell?" he muttered to himself as he enlarged the image. That's when he noticed something strange. In the reflection of the window in the background, Edward Blackwell could be partially seen in an intimidating posture, pointing his finger at someone out of frame. His phone rang. Unknown number. Jonathan Walker. "Mr. Walker, my name is Laura Rivers, Eleanor Rivers' niece. My aunt asked me to deliver something to you. Can we meet?" The journalist's heart raced. "Of course, where and when?" "At Boston Common, near the lake, in an hour. Come alone." At the Blackwell and Harrison Investments office, Richard Harrison was receiving a worrying call. What do you mean the safe was opened? Who entered the apartment? His face paled as he heard the response. The niece. And you let her leave with documents. Incompetence. At Edward's mansion, the news hit like a bomb. We need to intercept this niece before she delivers anything to anyone. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed the number of an old contact in the police force. At the Cambridge Equestrian Club, Michael Anderson, Jasmine's trainer, was receiving unusual visitors. Reporters from all over the country wanted to know more about the mare who had become a national heroine. I've never seen similar behavior in a horse, he explained patiently. Jasmine has always been special, but this was beyond comprehension. Journalist insisted, is it true that the mare belonged to Edward Blackwell in the past? Michael hesitated for a moment. I can't confirm who the former owner was. When Jasmine came to the club, it was through an anonymous donation. What Michael didn't reveal was the note he had received with the mare years ago. A note signed by ER that said, take good care of her. One day she will prove her worth in a way no one would imagine possible. At Boston Common, Jonathan Walker waited anxiously. His journalistic instinct told him he was about to uncover a story that could change his career forever. What he didn't know was that, a few meters away in a parked car, someone was watching him with equal interest. Boston Common was particularly busy that sunny afternoon. Families strolled, couples walked hand in hand, and the elderly fed the ducks on the lake. Apparently no one was paying attention to the middle-aged man sitting on a bench near the shore, nervously checking his watch every 5 minutes. Walker felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. In 15 years of journalistic career, he had never been so close to a potentially explosive story. His phone vibrated. A message. Change of plans. Cedar Street Cafe, back table, 15 minutes. Danger. The journalist rose quickly, looking around with suspicion. That's when he noticed a man in a dark suit talking on the phone, persistently looking in his direction. Without hesitation, Jonathan followed an alternative path, avoiding the more open areas of the park. At Cedar Street Cafe, a small traditional establishment in the Back Bay neighborhood, Laura Rivers waited nervously, a thick folder on the table and an untouched cup of coffee in front of her. Jonathan Walker, she asked when he approached. Laura Rivers. He sat down, noticing the tension on the woman's face. What happened? Why the change of location? Someone broke into my aunt's apartment while I was retrieving the documents from the safe. She pushed the folder toward the journalist. I managed to escape through the back, but I'm sure they're following me. Jonathan opened the folder, coming across a meticulously organized collection of documents, photos, digital media recordings, and handwritten notes. This is, he began, leafing through the first papers. 40 years of evidence against Edward Blackwell and his financial empire, Laura completed. My aunt documented everything. Fraud, market manipulation, use of inside information, pressure on tax auditors, bribery of public officials, and there's more. She removed a smaller envelope from her purse. These are the most important pieces of evidence. Documents signed by Edward, authorizing the transfer of client funds to offshore accounts without their knowledge. My aunt made copies and had them authenticated by a notary at the time, keeping the originals for safety. This is pure dynamite. Laura, do you realize the danger you're in? I do. She took a sip of coffee to calm her nerves. That's why I made digital copies of everything and stored them on secure servers. If anything happens to me or my aunt, an automatic protocol will send everything to federal authorities and media outlets. Jonathan was impressed with the precaution. Your aunt thought of everything. She waited 4 decades for this, Jonathan. When she learned that Edward was planning to expand his business and launch an investment fund aimed at retirees and pensioners, she decided it was time to act. She couldn't allow more innocent people to be deceived. The journalist carefully stored the documents in his backpack. I'll need a few days to analyze all this and confirm the information. We don't have days. At any moment, Edward might try to silence my aunt again. This time, there might not be a horse to save her. Laura hesitated for a moment. There's something about this horse that you need to know too. Meanwhile, in the luxurious office of Blackwell and Harrison Investments, Edward was receiving troubling news. What do you mean, lost her? She was a simple university professor carrying a folder, he vociferated into the phone. Find her, and find out where the Boston Chronicle journalist went. I want both under constant surveillance. Richard Harrison entered without knocking, his face red with concern. Edward, I just received a call from Congressman Porter. He's withdrawing support for our expansion project. Said the timing is unfavorable. He paused dramatically. They're abandoning ship, Edward. The rumors have already reached Washington. Edward remained silent for a few seconds, his eyes fixed on a framed photograph on his desk, a younger version of himself, standing next to a smiling teenage girl mounted on a white mare. Jasmine. Richard, do you believe in coincidences? He finally asked. What are you talking about? Jasmine, my mare, the same one I gave to my daughter. The same one I had to sell when we faced that temporary crisis in 2003. The same one that saved Eleanor. So what? It was just a crazy coincidence. The animal was in the right place at the right time. Edward shook his head. Coincidences of that magnitude don't exist. Someone planned this. He rose abruptly. I need to talk to Eleanor, personally. At the hospital, Eleanor was being discharged. Against the doctor's recommendations, she had insisted on returning home. You should stay a few more days for observation, argued Dr. Morrison. Doctor, I have urgent matters to attend to. Besides, she smiled, adjusting the shawl over her shoulders, I have an important appointment with the past. At the hospital exit, a small news crew was waiting. A young reporter approached with a microphone. Ms. Rivers, how do you feel after the miraculous rescue? Blessed, my dear, and ready for justice. Do you intend to report your attacker? An enigmatic smile appeared on Eleanor's lips. The complaints will be made at the appropriate time, and not just about the bridge incident. What do you mean by that? Wait for tomorrow's newspaper. That was all she said before getting into her niece's car, which had just arrived. At the equestrian club, Michael Anderson was receiving an unexpected visit. Jonathan Walker was walking toward him, noting something in a small notebook. Mr. Anderson, I'm Jonathan Walker from the Boston Chronicle. I'd like to talk about Jasmine. The trainer sighed, tired of the numerous interviews in recent days. What else can I say that hasn't already been published? It was inexplicable behavior. I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of working with horses. What about the mare's former owner, Eleanor Rivers? Michael visibly paled. How did you find that out? So it's true, Jonathan quickly made a note. Why did you keep it a secret? It was her explicit request when she donated the animal to the club. Actually, even I didn't know she was the true owner until a few months ago, when I received a letter explaining everything. What letter? Michael hesitated, but finally decided. Come with me. In his small office at the back of the stable, the trainer unlocked a drawer and removed a yellowed envelope. I received this 3 months ago. The letter said that if anything happened to Ms. Rivers, I should deliver its contents to the press. Jonathan carefully opened the envelope. Inside, he found old photographs of Edward Blackwell with a teenage girl next to Jasmine, and a document of purchase of the animal in Eleanor Rivers' name dated 2003. There was also a handwritten letter. Dear Michael, if you are reading this, it's because my suspicions have been confirmed, and Edward Blackwell has tried to silence me. Jasmine is not just a horse. She is the link that connects us to the past. This mare belonged to Edward's daughter Olivia, who confided in me before her sudden departure suspicions about her father's business. It was Olivia who first alerted me that Edward might be involved in Thomas Mitchell's disappearance. When Edward sold Jasmine during a financial crisis, I secretly acquired the animal as a way to keep my promise to Olivia alive, that someday the truth would be revealed. There are more documents. Look for the hollow hoof in the third stable. Eleanor Rivers. Jonathan looked at Michael, incredulous. Hollow hoof? What is she talking about? Michael smiled. Come see. In the third stable, behind a loose wooden board, there was a small cavity. Michael removed a cylindrical metal object. She installed this years ago, said it was insurance, in case she needed it. Jonathan opened the cylinder, finding a flash drive and more documents. What happened to Olivia, Edward's daughter? From what I know, she suddenly moved abroad. She never returned to the United States. At the Boston Chronicle office, William Davidson, the editor-in-chief, couldn't believe what he was seeing. Jonathan, this is a bombshell. He leafed through the documents, examined the photos. These are extremely serious accusations against one of the most powerful men in the state. We need independent confirmation before publishing. I'm already working on that. I've contacted 3 former Blackwell employees mentioned in the documents. 2 confirmed the facts, but refuse to speak publicly for fear of retaliation. The 3rd agreed to record a statement, as long as his identity is protected. What about Thomas Mitchell, the missing accountant? That's the most delicate point, Jonathan typed frantically on his computer. According to Eleanor's documents, he didn't leave the country as Edward claimed. She suspects something serious happened to him after he discovered the fraud. There are no official records of him leaving the country, nor any credit card or passport use since 1984. William massaged his temples. We need legal protection before publishing this, and maybe physical security too. I'll talk to the legal department. Meanwhile, Eleanor was returning to her apartment accompanied by Laura. Right at the entrance, they noticed signs of the break-in, open drawers, books out of place. They were looking for the documents, Eleanor observed calmly. Aunt, you can't stay here. It's too dangerous. Don't worry, dear, I was expecting this. The elderly woman moved her wheelchair to a bookshelf and pressed a hidden switch. A panel opened, revealing a monitor with security camera images. I installed this system months. Ergo, I've been recording every suspicious movement around my apartment. On one of the screens, a dark car was parked across the street. 2 men remained inside watching the building. See? They're still here, but it doesn't matter anymore. Eleanor smiled serenely. The game is coming to an end. All the pieces are in motion. At Edward's mansion, the tension was palpable. He had cancelled all appointments and remained locked in his study, taking generous doses of whiskey while trying to contact political and business allies. One by one, the calls were ignored or answered with evasive excuses. What's happening, Richard? He asked his partner over the phone. It's as if everyone knows something I don't. I received information that the Boston Chronicle is preparing a story about us, something big, and there are rumors that federal agents are monitoring our accounts. A heavy silence settled between them. Eleanor, Edward finally spoke. She planned all this for years. The bridge incident wasn't an accident, it was a trap, and we fell right into it. At the equestrian club, Jasmine had become an attraction. Visitors lined up to see the heroic mare that had saved the elderly woman. Michael, however, remained vigilant. Jonathan's revelations had left him apprehensive, aware that he was now part of something much bigger than he had imagined. Evening was falling over Boston when Edward Blackwell decided it was time for a direct confrontation. He dismissed his driver and for the first time in years drove his own car, a black Mercedes-Benz discreet enough not to attract attention. On the passenger seat, a leather folder containing documents he judged to be his only salvation. Heavy late afternoon traffic gave him time to reflect on how his life had reached that point. He had started as an ambitious young man from a humble background, determined to carve out his place in the world of finance. The first irregularities were small, almost insignificant. Privileged information here, some accounting manipulation there. But like a snowball, the scheme grew until it became a labyrinth of fraud from which he could no longer escape. He parked 2 blocks from Eleanor's building, making sure he wasn't being followed. The old building had no doorman, just an intercom. System. Edward adjusted his tie, took a deep breath and buzzed apartment 302. Who is it? Eleanor's voice sounded surprisingly firm over the intercom. I think you know very well, Eleanor. We need to talk. A brief silence followed. Come up, Edward. I've been waiting for you for 40 years. In the apartment, Eleanor had dismissed Laura, moments before, insisting that she needed to face this moment alone. Her niece had been reluctant, but eventually gave in after Eleanor promised to keep her cell phone on with an open call the entire time. When the doorbell rang, Eleanor directed her wheelchair to the door. As she opened it, she faced the man who for decades had been the center of her obsession with justice. "Come in, Edward. Would you like some coffee? Or do you prefer something stronger? I imagine your nerves need soothing." He entered cautiously, examining the environment. The modest apartment, with well-preserved antique furniture, seemed the opposite of what he expected to find. On the walls, black and white photographs told the story of a life dedicated to work and family. "No drinks, thank you. I came straight." "To the point, Eleanor. What exactly do you want?" The elderly woman smiled, indicating the sofa for him to sit down. "After 4 decades, you still don't understand. I want justice, Edward. Simply justice. And how much money will this justice cost?" He opened the folder, revealing a contract and a check with a considerable amount. "I'm willing to resolve this civilly. A generous compensation in exchange for your silence and all the documents you've collected." Eleanor laughed, a genuine laugh that disconcerted the businessman. "You really think it's about money? Look around you, Edward. I live. Modestly, I always have. I could have demanded millions years ago if that was my goal." "Then what? Revenge? For a man you barely knew?" Eleanor's countenance changed, a shadow crossing her face. "Thomas Mitchell wasn't just a colleague, Edward. He was my brother." The revelation hit Edward like a punch. "You're see, brother? But you had different last names." "Half-siblings, to be precise. Same mother, different fathers. We grew up separately, reunited as adults. When he got the job at your company, it was on my recommendation. I had been working there for years, remember? But we kept our relationship a secret to avoid nepotism." Edward stood up, visibly disturbed. "This changes everything and nothing at the same time, Eleanor. What happened to Thomas was an accident. We never intended." "An accident?" Her voice trembled with indignation. "Is that what you call it? He discovered your fraud, confronted you, and then just accidentally disappeared. Things got out of control." Edward raised his voice, decades of guilt finally finding release. "He threatened to expose everything. Richard lost his head during the argument, pushed Thomas, who hit his head on the corner of the desk. It was a terrible moment, a mistake that haunts me to this day." Eleanor closed her eyes, absorbing the confirmation she had sought for so long. "And then? What did you do with him?" "You don't want to know details, Eleanor. Please." "I have the right to know." She hit the arm of her wheelchair hard. 40 years waiting for answers. 40 years imagining what happened to my brother. Edward collapsed back onto the sofa, the weight of the years and secrets finally manifesting on his aged face. "We buried him on the company's rural property, the one that later became the Sunset Heights subdivision." Silent tears ran down Eleanor's wrinkled face. They weren't just tears of sadness, but also of a strange sense of relief. She finally knew the truth. "Why did Olivia leave?" she asked after a moment, surprising Edward again. "How do you—" Olivia discovered parts of the scheme when she was a teenager. She overheard conversations, found documents. She confronted me, threatened to report me. I gave her 2 options, a comfortable life abroad or face the consequences of destroying the family. "You threatened your own daughter?" "I protected her." Edward protested, more to himself than to Eleanor. "She was young, impetuous. She didn't understand how the world works. Today she has a prosperous life in Italy, a family, children. She never wanted to speak to me again, but at least she's safe and well." Eleanor observed the man before her, no longer the powerful businessman everyone feared, but just an elderly gentleman consumed by guilt and fear. "And Jasmine? How do you explain what happened on the bridge?" A gleam of curiosity appeared in Edward's tired eyes. "That's something I'd like to understand too. That mare, she meant a lot to Olivia. When I had to sell her, my daughter didn't forgive me. It was the last straw in our already fragile relationship. I secretly bought Jasmine. revealed Eleanor. Initially as a way to maintain a connection with Olivia, who had approached me months before suspecting her father's business dealings. She trusted me just as Thomas had trusted me. So it was all planned, even the rescue. The attack on me, yes, I knew it would come. I installed cameras, trackers, took all precautions. But the rescue? Eleanor smiled, an enigmatic smile that intrigued Edward. Some things are beyond our understanding, don't you think? They say animals have a sensitivity that we humans have lost along the way. At that moment, Eleanor's cell phone rang. It was Laura, concerned about the prolonged silence. Eleanor assured her she was fine and hung up. What happens now, Eleanor? You already have your confirmation. Justice happens, Edward. Tomorrow, the Boston Chronicle will publish a story detailing your financial fraud. Federal authorities are already in possession of digital copies of all the documents I've gathered over the years. And what about it, Thomas? That part I'll keep secret for the sake of his family. Your financial crimes are enough to ensure that you spend the rest of your days answering to society. Edward nodded slowly. A part of him felt strangely relieved, as if an enormous weight was being removed from his shoulders. You know, Eleanor, in a way I always knew this day would come. I've lived for decades looking over my shoulder, waiting for the past to catch up with me. He rose with difficulty. I won't run away. I'm too old to start over. As Edward headed for the door, Eleanor called to him one last time. One final question, Edward. Was it worth it? All the money, the power, the influence. Was it worth the price you paid? The businessman stopped, his hand on the doorknob, without turning around. No, Eleanor, it wasn't. Nothing is worth the weight of conscience that we carry. Meanwhile, at the Boston Chronicle office, Jonathan and his team were working frantically to finalize the story that would be published the following morning. William, the editor-in-chief, had assigned 4 additional journalists to verify each piece of information, each document. Everything needs to be impeccable, he insisted. When this bomb explodes, the reaction will be violent. Blackwell has powerful allies. At the equestrian club, Michael was finishing his evening care of Jasmine when he received an unexpected visit. Laura Rivers appeared breathless, as if she had been running. Mr. Anderson, I need your help. My aunt is alone. With Edward Blackwell right now. What? Why did you leave her? She insisted, said it was something she needed to face alone. Michael nodded, understanding. What can I do? She wants Jasmine to be taken to a safe location tonight. She fears someone might try something against the mayor to intimidate her. The trainer hesitated for just a moment. I know a ranch on the outskirts of the city. The owner is an old friend, discreet and reliable. We can take Jasmine there right now. As they prepared the transport, Laura received a text message from her aunt. It's done. He confessed everything. The truth has finally come to light. At Richard Harrison's mansion, panic had set in. He had tried to contact Edward dozens of times without success. His contacts in the police informed him that federal investigators had requested a breach of bank secrecy for all companies in the Blackwell and Harrison group. Desperate, he began gathering documents for destruction when his private security guard hurriedly entered his study. Mr. Harrison, there are federal agents at the entrance. They have a search and seizure warrant. Richard let the documents fall from his trembling hands. Finally, after 4 decades, the house of cards was beginning to collapse. The next morning, Boston woke up to the impact of news that occupied the front page of the Boston Chronicle in bold headlines. The Empire of Fraud, 4 decades of financial crimes by Blackwell and Harrison. The report, signed by Jonathan Walker, spanning over 8 pages, meticulously detailed the scheme of fraud, market manipulations, and use of privileged information that had sustained the rise of the financial conglomerate. In the hours that followed, the entire city seemed to be talking about nothing else. Radio programs dedicated special broadcasts to the case, television channels interrupted their programming for special bulletins, and on social media, the hashtag #BlackwellGate instantly became the most discussed topic in the country. In Eleanor's apartment, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, authorities, and even former colleagues were trying to make contact, but the elderly woman, exhausted after decades of silent struggle, had opted to turn off all electronic devices and spend the day in the company of her niece, savoring the feeling of a mission accomplished. "How do you feel, Aunt?" asked Laura, serving tea in porcelain cups inherited from her grandmother. Eleanor contemplated the question for a few moments, her eyes fixed on the landscape through the window. "At peace, Laura. Finally at peace. You know, for years I thought I was seeking revenge. Only now do I realize that what I really wanted was liberation." In the city center, the Blackwell and Harrison Investments headquarters was surrounded by police vehicles and news crew vans. Federal agents were leaving the building carrying boxes of seized documents and computers. An officer was giving a press conference on the entrance steps. "We are facing what could be the largest financial fraud case in state history. The investigations are still in the initial phase, but we already have sufficient evidence to indict the main people involved. The Federal Prosecutor's Office requests that clients and former employees with relevant information contact us through official channels." At the Equestrian Club, Michael was facing his own media siege. Dozens of reporters wanted to know more about Jasmine, the mare that had become a symbol of the story. "No, she's not here," he patiently repeated. "And no, I can't reveal where she is. Please understand that the animal's safety is our priority at this moment." What few knew was that during the night, Jasmine had been transferred to a remote ranch, property of a veteran horse breeder named Samuel Thompson. The place, surrounded by native woods and far from the main roads, offered the perfect refuge. At the central Boston police station, Edward Blackwell voluntarily turned himself in to authorities shortly after noon, accompanied only by his lawyer. Surprisingly serene, he handed over a folder containing a detailed confession of his financial crimes, corroborating much of the accusations published in the newspaper. "My client wishes to fully cooperate with the investigations," declared the lawyer to the cameras that gathered at the entrance of the police station. "He recognizes his mistakes and is willing to face the legal consequences of his actions." The news of Edward's confession and voluntary surrender caused almost as much commotion as the original report. Political and legal analysts debated on TV stations. Was it a strategy to obtain more lenient sentences, an attempt to protect other involved parties, or simply the final gesture of a man tired of running from his ghosts? Richard Harrison, unlike his partner, did not demonstrate the same dignity. He tried to flee during the night on his private jet, but was detained at Manchester Airport in New Hampshire with suitcases containing $500,000 in cash and falsified documents. His preventive detention was immediately ordered. In the early afternoon, Laura received an unexpected call. It was Olivia Blackwell, Edward's daughter, calling from Florence, Italy. "I needed to speak with your aunt," said the emotional voice on the other end of the line. "I saw the news here in Italy. It's in all the papers." Eleanor accepted the phone from her niece's hands, her heart racing. "Olivia, it's been so long. Ms. Rivers, I don't even know where to begin. When I left the United States, I carried so much anger, so much disappointment. I promised myself I would never look back." "I understand, dear. You were just a teenager facing truths that were too difficult. When I saw the news today, something awakened in me. Memories, feelings I tried to bury, and Jasmine, I can't believe that she's been with you all these years." Eleanor smiled. "She's always been special, Olivia. A link between pasts that needed reconciliation." "I'm coming back to the States," announced Olivia after a pause. "My father, despite everything, is still my father, and it seems he's finally facing the truth. I want to be present, even if it's for a final reckoning." After the call, Eleanor asked Laura to take her to the ranch where Jasmine was being housed. She felt an inexplicable need to be with the mare at that moment. Samuel Thompson's ranch was a peaceful place, surrounded by century-old oak trees and verdant fields. When they arrived, they were greeted by the owner, a white-haired gentleman, with a welcoming smile. "Ms. Rivers, it's an honor to finally meet you. Michael told me everything about your story." "Impressive." "The honor is mine, Mr. Thompson. Thank you for offering refuge to Jasmine. An extraordinary mare, without a doubt. In 50 years of raising horses, I've never seen an animal with such intelligence and sensitivity." Jasmine was in a spacious paddock, grazing peacefully under the mild afternoon sun. When Eleanor approached in her wheelchair, the mare immediately raised her head and walked in her direction, as if recognizing her. "Hello, old friend," whispered Eleanor, extending her hand to caress the animal's soft muzzle. "We did it, didn't we? We finally did it." Samuel and Laura maintained a respectful distance, observing the intimate moment between the elderly woman and the mare. "The connection between them is impressive," commented the breeder. "They say horses have a perception that goes beyond our understanding." "My aunt always believed that," replied Laura. "You know, for years I thought she was simply obsessed with the past, unable to move forward. Only now do I understand that her persistence wasn't obsession, it was faith in justice." At the Boston Chronicle office, Jonathan was receiving congratulations from colleagues from all over the country. His report was already being considered a candidate for national and international journalism awards. But beyond the professional recognition, the young journalist felt the satisfaction of having contributed to something truly important. "How did you know you could trust me?" he asked Eleanor when he visited her the following morning. "Among so many journalists, why did you choose me?" The elderly woman smiled, enigmatic as always. "Your name appeared in a search I did on investigative reporting. You had exposed a scheme of corruption in municipal contracts 2 years ago, facing threats and pressure. You showed integrity and courage, rare qualities these days." 3 weeks after the publication of the report, Boston witnessed the first judicial hearing of the case. The central courthouse was surrounded by protesters demanding justice, while defrauded investors organized class action lawsuits against Blackwell and Harrison. Eleanor, against medical recommendations, insisted on being present. When Edward entered the courtroom, their gazes briefly met. There was no anger or resentment, just a silent acknowledgement of the conclusion of a cycle that had lasted almost half a century. At the end of the hearing, which determined Edward's preventive detention and the continuation of investigations, Olivia, newly arrived from Italy, timidly approached Eleanor at the exit of the courthouse. "Ms. Rivers." "I don't know if you remember me." The elderly woman smiled, extending her hands. "Of course I remember, Olivia. How could I forget? You were just a teenager, but you already showed impressive strength of character." The two women, separated by age but united by a common history, talked at length in the courthouse gardens. Olivia shared her life in Italy, her marriage, her children, her career as a university professor. Eleanor told of her persistence, her silent promise to her brother, her long wait for justice. "My father, and he's going to be in prison for a long time, isn't he?" asked Olivia, her voice breaking. "Probably. The crimes are serious and the evidence is compelling, but he finally chose to face the truth, Olivia. There's a certain dignity in that. I know it seems strange, but I feel a mix of sadness and relief, as if a weight I didn't know I was carrying had been removed." Eleanor nodded, understanding. "Because now you can finally reconcile the image of the father you loved with the reality of the man he was. No more secrets, no more doubts, just the truth, however. Painful it may be." A month later, the Cambridge Equestrian Club organized a special event, Jasmine's official retirement. The mare, now 16 years old, would be permanently transferred to Samuel's ranch, where she would spend her days in peace, away from the spotlight that her unexpected fame had attracted. The ceremony, simple but moving, was attended by Eleanor, Laura, Michael, Jonathan, and, to the surprise of many, Olivia. After brief speeches, the white mare was led to a specially adapted van, decorated with flowers and a sign that said, "Jasmine," a symbol of hope and justice. As she watched the vehicle driving away, Eleanor felt a serenity she hadn't experienced in decades. The circle had finally closed. Thomas, her brother, had been silenced, but her quest for truth and justice had prevailed, even if 40 years later. "What will you do now, Ms. Rivers?" asked Jonathan, who was documenting every moment for a special report. The elderly woman smiled, her eyes shining with renewed vitality. "Live, my dear. Simply live. For the first time in many years, I can look to the future without the weight of the past." That night, as Laura was settling her into bed, Eleanor asked her niece to open the bedside table drawer. There's something I want to show you. Inside the drawer, there was a yellowed envelope containing an old photo. Two smiling young people, a man and a woman in front of a commercial building. Thomas and I, on the day he was hired by Blackwell Investments, explained Eleanor, caressing the photograph with trembling fingers. We were so hopeful, so full of dreams. Laura hugged her aunt, allowing tears to finally flow freely. They weren't just tears of sadness, but of liberation, of conclusion, of peace. The following week, the Boston Chronicle published a special edition about the case, with articles signed by experts in financial crimes, interviews with former employees of Blackwell and Harrison, who finally felt safe to speak, and a moving profile of Eleanor Rivers, the woman who waited 4 decades for justice. The article ended with a quote from Eleanor that perfectly summarized her journey. Truth has patience. It waits as long as necessary, but always finds its way to the light. In her apartment, surrounded by Laura, Olivia, Jonathan, and Michael, Eleanor raised a glass in a simple but meaningful toast. To Thomas, she said with a firm voice, may he finally rest in peace. To Thomas, they responded in unison, completing a circle of justice and redemption that had spanned almost half a century. At Samuel Thompson's ranch, under a starry New England sky, Jasmine grazed peacefully. A white mare that, against all odds, had become a symbol of hope and the catalyst of a truth long buried but never forgotten. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Eleanor and Jasmine has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it here by clicking on the link to your left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories.